Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Abigail Moy, and I am the director of the Legal Empowerment Network team at Advocacy. I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar today, where we're going to be discussing some key themes. The title of our webinar is CSW 2022 and What's Next? Legal Empowerment as a Pathway to Gender Justice. Before we start, I just have a few housekeeping items to share, a few reminders. First, please note that this event will have simultaneous translation in English and Spanish. To activate the translation, please look for the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, click on it, and select your language of choice. The event is also being recorded. We will share the full recording later on our YouTube channel. We'll try to keep the roundtable discussion to about 40 minutes and then open it up for questions and comments. At any time, if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. We'll record it and save it for the discussion section afterwards. And when we open it up for discussion, please feel free to press the button raising your hand if you'd like to contribute, and we'll call on you. Otherwise, please do keep yourself on mute while presenters are speaking so that we can hear. Now, as we get started, I was hoping everyone could introduce themselves in the chat. Please share your name, your organization, which country you're calling in from today, so we get a sense of who's joining us today. Okay, while people are coming in, again, please introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, your organization, where you're from, and I will get started. So today's conversation is being convened by the Legal Empowerment Network. We are a global community of people who are committed to advancing justice. We meet in person, online, to exchange practical tools and advice. We campaign on issues that affect us all. Together, we are building a global movement for legal empowerment, and one capable of tackling the greatest justice challenges of our time. We are the largest community of grassroots justice defenders in the world. We represent over 170 countries, with nearly 11,000 individual members and almost 3,000 organizations globally, all working to advance justice for all. Collectively, we believe that law can be a powerful tool for exercising our rights to dignity, security, health, and prosperity. We think it can help us protect our natural resources, our livelihoods, and our communities. Today, we are here to talk about legal empowerment, which is the ability to know, use, and shape the law, and how it can be a critical strategy for advancing gender justice. Many grassroots justice groups deploy community paralegals or their equivalent, which is a common legal empowerment tool. These community paralegals accompany women and girls as they navigate justice systems that are often hostile and can ensure these systems are accountable and responsive to women's needs. Community paralegals are often women themselves and grow into leaders in their own right. There is significant evidence of the impact of legal empowerment and on access to justice in strengthening women's rights. For example, just a few examples here of some studies I found interesting. In Mozambique, a study found that despite facing intense gender discrimination, almost every dispossessed widow or divorced woman with access to a community paralegal was able to successfully assert her land. Paralegal-led community land protection efforts in Uganda, Liberia, and Mozambique resulted in more inclusive local governing bodies, enhancing in particular the voices of women in decision-making around land and natural resources. A study in Ecuador demonstrated that female legal aid clients were 17% less likely to experience physical violence after separating from their partners than non-legal aid clients. These examples are just a starting point. Legal empowerment approaches can have a positive impact on the rights of women workers, on refugee and migrant women, on access to citizenship and legal identity, among many other benefits. We also believe that legal empowerment is inherently feminist. Legal empowerment is about challenging and subverting hierarchy and dominant power relations, and distributing power to communities at the grassroots. Intersectional feminism also values lived experiences as expertise and accounts for multiple layers of discrimination that a woman may face. Legal empowerment is also about all of these things. Legal empowerment means that people do not need to be lawyers. They do not need formal expertise or training in law. They need to draw from their own experiences to create change and to help one another realize their rights. Now I'll turn this over to my colleague, Akila, to share a bit more about our network's efforts to tackle gender injustice and introduce our CSW debrief. Akila?
Great, thank you so much, Abby. My name is Akila Politetti, and I'm part of the advocacy team with Namati and the Legal Empowerment Network, and I'm really excited to be with all of you here today. So first, I wanted to share that gender justice has been one of the top priorities for members of the Legal Empowerment Network. More organizations in our network work on gender and women's rights compared to almost any other issue. And it's been a major area of interest. So to respond to this interest, we recently shared a survey with our membership to better understand their work in this area and what we can do together to advance collective learning and action around gender justice and legal empowerment. So I wanted to share just a few of the results of that survey here with you today. So first, we found that of the respondents, 85% did work on issues of women's rights and gender equality, and the remaining 15% did not, but wanted to do more in this area. The majority of members, 76%, engaged in community level work, so direct support to women on the ground. Following that, 70% worked in policy, advocacy, and collective action, and 51% on research and learning in this area. In terms of the types of issues around gender and women's rights, most organizations, 73% worked on gender-based violence and family law, followed by issues of gender, environmental and climate justice, and land rights. And third most popular was the issue of women's health and reproductive rights. Many of our members also focused on specific communities, most commonly adolescent girls and youth, then Indigenous women and racial and ethnic minority women, among others. We also asked our members what motivated them to participate in the Legal Empowerment Network in particular, and many of the responses spoke about enhancing learning and exchange, building a strong network with others across the world who work on issues of gender justice, building a more powerful joint advocacy agenda together to advance systemic change, engaging in joint fundraising and resource mobilization efforts, as well as connecting local and grassroots issues with regional and global level platforms and issues. We also asked what issue areas specifically members would like to work further on together. And here too, gender violence emerged as a key area of interest, followed by women and girls leadership in legal empowerment and women's access to justice. And finally, we asked members what are the kinds of activities they would like to engage in together. And I'll share the top three, which include networking and connecting with others who work on gender justice across the network, learning from one another, whether through an exchange or another means, sharing challenges and strategies, and third, building a joint advocacy agenda to push for systemic change. And so in this event today, as you can see, network members are keen to connect with others who work on gender justice and legal empowerment, and especially engage in collective action, including around key moments. And so we thought we would convene this conversation today because the Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, is one of those key moments around gender justice that emerges every year. It is an opportunity for the global feminist movement, for women's rights organizations, for justice organizations to come together to advance policy change and to spark commitment towards action on gender equality and justice. As a result, we wanted to take this opportunity to speak a little bit about what transpired at this year's CSW and begin to think about ways to build momentum in the future. So this year's CSW, as you may know, focused specifically on the intersection of gender justice, environmental justice, and climate justice. And given the importance of legal empowerment and justice and advancing gender equity, including in the face of climate change and environmental harm, all of our speakers here today ensure that these issues were brought to the forefront and addressed at CSW in various forums. For example, access to justice for Indigenous women and girls, or the ways in which legal empowerment can support women's land rights, the threats faced by women land defenders on the ground, and women's decision-making in local governance spaces and structures. So today I want to introduce a few panelists who will share their
Who ate my mango for juice?
If you could all please place yourself on mute kindly so that we can hear the presenter, that would be great. Thank you so much. So I'd like to introduce a few panelists today who will share their debrief first on this year's CSW, some of the key messages that were addressed around gender and justice, and how we can build on the momentum. So first, I'd like to turn to Beverly Longid, who is the coordinator with the International Indigenous People Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation in the Philippines. So Beverly, please go ahead. We'd love to hear from you, your debrief on CSW this year and any opportunities that emerge for our work and movement.
Hi, thank you very much, Akila. Yes, I'm Beverly Longid. I am an Igorot, one of the indigenous peoples, one of the many indigenous peoples here in the Philippines. So a quick background on the IPM-STL. So it's basically, this is a global platform composing of indigenous peoples organizations or community organizations. So we work largely on global campaigning and of course country work in relation to people's campaigns on land and the issue of self-determination, free, prior, informed consent. I mean, for this year's, I'd like to share some insights in relation to my participation with this year's CSW. One, in relation to the theme, the theme speaks of breaking the bias, but in 2 or 3 occasions where I've been invited to participate in online forums in CSW, I always include not only break the bias, but break the silence. Because one, I think in terms of breaking the bias and breaking the silence, this would include putting women in leadership position, not only in government, in trade, but also even within organizations of civil society. And 2, when we speak of leadership, this should also involve empowerment of women, especially of indigenous women. And when we speak of empowerment, this actually, I always believe, and I always say this comes from a continuous process of awareness building and capacity development. Now, awareness building in terms of rights as women, and of course, in our case, also rights as indigenous peoples. And then, of course, third will be, you cannot speak of leadership, you cannot speak of empowerment if women are not recognized as women. So it is in this context where I always say that with awareness comes power, no? Because without this kind of power or empowerment, I mean, it's the same thing. You haven't really empowered women to be able to break the bias and break the silence. And I've always worked in terms of indigenous peoples. We, how do you say this? We do not try to create a separate women's movement within the indigenous peoples movement. But I've always believed that when we speak of indigenous women's movement, this is also part of the indigenous peoples movement to defend ancestral land and for the right to self-determination. Because you cannot speak of an enlightened or empowered indigenous women if their communities are still suffering from the ill effects of plunder, the ill effects of non-recognition of ancestral land rights. So in this case, in our case here in the Philippines, another aspect also of the struggle of indigenous women is also defending what do you call this, the attacks against indigenous women, human rights defenders who are part of communities and organizations fighting against plunder, fighting against militarization. And in the past years, we have seen an intensified attack on indigenous women. But here we would see the, how do you say this, the effective use of law against indigenous women, human rights defenders, and the effective use of the judicial system to further harass indigenous women, human rights defenders. So what do I mean? In terms of policies, we would see now the use of the criminal justice system, like the simple service of search warrants against women activists, wherein you would see a violation of due process of law, and in the end you would come out now with trump-up charges against indigenous women activists. And normally the charges that they file against indigenous women activists are common crimes, common crimes of illegal possession of firearms, illegal possession of ammunition. So why these kinds of cases? Because in the context wherein you have an ongoing conflict in the country, more often than not, indigenous women activists are also labeled as abating acts of terror. And this puts me into the second point, that it has not only stopped in terms of this called judicial harassments, but you now have national laws being implemented under the guise of national security. The Philippines has just recently enacted an anti-terror law in a situation wherein any kind of dissent, any kind of resistance is labeled by government as an act of terror. This becomes a very dangerous law. Especially also that we have a very yes.
Apologies. If you could all please stay on mute. But thank you also so much, Beverly, for your contributions. I know there's so much to say, and it sounds like women human rights defenders are facing incredible threats in the Philippines. And I hope that we'll have a little bit more space in the discussion as well to touch upon this. So
last 10 seconds. So I think
sure.
in the case of the indigenous peoples, given this kind of context, we also speak of legal empowerment by further empowering indigenous women to be able to document the cases against them so that we can be able to use this documentation for monitoring and reporting and be able to come out with what you call this appropriate and responsive changes in national policy. Thanks, Akila.
Thanks so much, Beverly. Thank you so much. And so next, I'd like to turn to Arti Narsi, who is a Civic Space Research Officer with Civicus. Arti, if you could please go ahead and share a few of your reflections from your engagement with CSW this year.
Thank you so much, Akila. And I think Beverly's intervention is a good segue into the work that we do as Civicus. So just quickly to say that Civicus is a global alliance dedicated to strengthening civil society and activism around the globe. And in my work as a civic space researcher for the Civicus Monitor, which documents and tracks trends in civic space, particularly restrictions, we've been seeing incredible amount of restrictions being faced by defenders working to advocate for climate justice. So this year for CSW, in light of the research that we released in October last year, we decided to center and organize a discussion around the experiences of women, environmental, land, and indigenous defenders, to not only focus on restrictions, but to talk about counter strategies and in particular, best practices that are being used to ensure inclusive participation in decision-making processes. And the key reflections that I'd like to share that came out of the event today, crucially, Many of the women human rights defenders on our panel emphasize the need to center their voices and their lived experiences. In particular, when we talk about intersectionality, so those groups and defenders that live on the intersections, these lived experiences need to be reflected in decision-making and policy-making practices. And we know that there is traditionally been a gap or a challenge in reflecting these experiences. And one good example that was shared during our event is that of the Unmute Civil Society campaign, which is a campaign that has been advocating for inclusive and meaningful participation at the United Nations. And this campaign has been led by a number of states, including Denmark, which was part of our event as well. And the state representative from Denmark shared one example of a good practice where for the last 2 years, Denmark has given up its seat at the CSW in favor of a civil society representative. And when we talk about good practices, these are the sort of interventions that we need from states, as well as other bodies, other UN-making bodies, to ensure that women human rights defenders get a seat at the table of decision-making. But the defenders that that were on the call with us reflected that there are real everyday experiences that hamper the ability to ensure this participation. So one issue that is still very much common is that how do we redistribute care work so that women, land, indigenous, and environmental defenders can attend forums like CSW and COP. Something else raised is that a lot of these forums don't take into account the sensitivities in terms of the realities of these women. For example, access to travel. Many of these women, specifically in the Global South, live in rural, remote areas. They are, at the front line advocating against extractive industries or against water scarcity. They do not have access to these resources and these means. And thirdly, there was also an emphasis that more grassroots and informal movements really do need to take up space and participate in these forums. There's been traditionally this over-reliance on more formal, organized civil society groups and movements. But interestingly as well, despite the restrictions that women defenders working on climate are facing, they are using counter strategies to deal with these extrajudicial harassment, for example, that Beverly mentioned. They're creating awareness and safe spaces for women to tell their stories. They're incorporating feminist education and feminist participatory action research to empower women in communities. And they've also centered a lot of their work on the feminist practice of care. That is ensuring that we protect the dignity of women, environmental, indigenous, and land defenders in doing this work. And then very lastly, I'd like to reflect on some of the recommendations, which I think are very important for us to consider, both in our work, but perhaps as well with the Legal Empowerment Network. So throughout the discussion, there was also this emphasis on online harassment that women human rights defenders are facing. And this is something that we've particularly seen and profiled in our work in Civicus, given that some of the top trends against defenders is intimidation and harassment, both in online and offline spaces. But women face this added layer of harassment that is gendered. So there were recommendations or questions around how do we create safe digital spaces for women human rights defenders protecting, fighting for climate change. And I think that here we can think about, what sort of legal empowerment tools and toolkits are available, but also how do we make it accessible to women who are on the front lines, particularly in the context of the Global South, where digital access is still an issue and empowerment tools and access to empowerment tools is still an issue. And secondly, and very importantly, in the face of restrictions, women human rights defenders in many parts of the world are being killed, are being criminalized, are being detained. At times, they require additional support for relocation, for example. One of the defenders, who was an African feminist on our call, shared an experience of how she was relocated after being detained for 10 days because she was in fear of her safety. And she mentioned that, in addition to relocation support, what she really needed is mental health and trauma support. And this is something that isn't as much accounted for in terms of protection mechanisms for women human rights defenders. And her suggestion was that there's a need for some sort of database, whether it be with a whole lot of resources, whether it be legal resources, relocation resources, and mental health support resources, so that defenders who are advocating for climate justice can get access to these sort of tools in a very accessible database where it's easy to kind of refer to, as we know that often these tools are not very readily available for all defenders unless you know of organizations providing that support. So I'm going to pause there for now, and I will be posting some resources as well, referring to our event and our work on CSW. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Aarti, for sharing those reflections and for your work on, I think, protection for grassroots justice defenders has been a critical issue and challenge for many in our network. So thank you so much for sharing that. Next, I'd like to introduce Emmanuel Umpula, who is the Executive Director of AfriWatch. So Emmanuel, thank you for joining us, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your engagement at CSW, including the agenda that you all helped launch around feminist natural resource governance, which I think will be of interest to many of our members.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to be with you here to share some ideas. So I will start, I think there is some noise. Maybe I should.
If you could speak a little louder.
Yeah. Let me just. Yeah. Can you hear me well? Yes. So I was saying that I think it's a good subject, and I agree with you that we need strong laws in place to support gender issue in the context of mining exploitation, for instance. So I will share some challenges when we are working, and the first one is I can say yes. In the mining area, the first problem we have is a problem of compensation. When we talk about compensation, when you have a big company which is coming, people, communities lose their land. And when we talk about compensation, we don't include women. When people talk about compensation, we see just men. And I think for us, we need the law which should clearly precise that they should include also the right of women. That's the first problem we have. The second one is access to justice. Access to justice, we know that in our villages and everywhere we are, women, they have less access to revenue, so they can't afford justice. That's the second problem. And also, not just because they don't have money, but also the justice is not in the place where they are living. So they need to move far away to find justice. That's the second problem. The third one, when we are talking, it's access to revenue. Access to revenue. And when you see in the mining area, extractive industry area, you will see that where women are working, there is less payment. For instance, if we talk about natural mining exploitation, you will see that women, they are not allowed to go in the mine to mine. But they have just the right to wash, because men think that if they have a presence of women, that the minerals will disappear. This is just the mindset, the way of thinking of men. So how can women have access to revenue when they don't have access to job, a good job in the mining area? So this kind of problem we are facing when we talk. That's why we need the law in place. But in addition to the law, I think there should be commitment from the state. First one, the state should provide a budget, because how can you implement the law without having a budget? And the second one, the will for the state to change the situation. And that should be, we can see that about, I can take the example of in Congo. We don't have a good statistics to show the progress the states are making, to see how they are trying to change the situation on the ground. Of course, we have the law in place, but we need to have that goodwill from the state to change the situation. The other challenge, how we sensitize communities leaders, because there is a big problem. And when we talk about sexual violence, we have a good law in Congo, for instance, but the implementation. You can go from the capital to another village, they don't know even the law, and they still giving to marriage kids. So how come we have the law in place, but at the same time people are not aware about that, and no one is not punished because of that? So we need the state. I agree with you, we need the law in place, but we need also the engagement of the state, but also other means to help women and to change through the law the situation of women in the mining area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Emmanuel. And so next, I'd like to turn actually to a couple of members of the Legal Empowerment Network, just to share a little bit more into the various ways in which our members use justice and legal empowerment efforts to advance gender equity and justice, and also to speak a little bit further in the last portion of our conversation about how we together as a network can advance gender justice together. So first, I'd like to introduce Bina Ramanand, who is with Family Frontiers in Malaysia, to share a little bit about their work at this intersection. Please go ahead, Bina. Hi, Bina, you're on mute.
Okay. Okay now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. So let's go in straight on how we use legal empowerment as a pathway for gender justice in context of Malaysian binational families. And the key areas that we work on. At Family Frontiers, we campaign for citizenship policies and laws that uphold gender equality. We advocate and provide support for women in binational marriages through raising the affected women's understanding of their rights and access to justice. And the law and policy reform is basically geared towards the gender discriminatory citizenship laws, which is citizenship being a gateway and access to the enjoyment of fundamental rights and liberties. We also work on the review and reform of immigration policies and practices that so that they are family friendly and gender sensitive, and also they are in the best interest of the children. So our approach to legal empowerment is our service delivery and network building of the target community to ensure access to information and peer support. And what happens here is we actually have a Facebook page that has information and provides access to various information that is difficult for our community to navigate. And we've also put them into peer support network groups so that they can provide access, they can help each other to navigate through the difficult processes and obstacles that are put in by the state. And these being some of these groups are based on nationality and language so that they can understand each other, and we provide the training as well. the next, what we also do is community engagement, self-advocacy of impacted families, and we platform the lived realities of the families, help them to self-advocate, build up their skills, so that they are actually at the front of our advocacy program and they can advocate for themselves. What we have done recently was to have a public interest case. We actually mobilize the community. We have 6 plaintiffs, and Family Frontiers filed a public interest constitutional challenge against Malaysian citizenship laws that discriminate Malaysian women. And although it's a public interest case, the lawsuit has been met with a lot of resistance. But throughout this this entire episode, which has gone on for over a year, where the government is resisting and taking us to a higher court and trying to strike us off, as yet, after a year and a half, only 3 of the plaintiffs got their citizenship. Through this case, what has happened is it is built up public awareness, and the impacted communities have reached out to us, and we are able to mobilize them better. And as you can see, there are many times when the government is resisted, and they have gone on further to a higher court, which is really exhausting, not just for us, but also for the families, various women who are impacted by this. So one of the ways we have done to bring up this case as a national issue is to front the Malaysian mothers who engage with the media, and their lived realities are at the forefront. But the system of governments, they're using taxpayers' money, and then the individuals are there who get exhausted and discouraged from seeking legal access. So what we do is basically to strengthen the community and use a multi-pronged approach, so that they are empowered to know the processes and help each other out, and they are strengthened by the information they have. So this is what I'm sure everyone else does. We do the international advocacy through the UN conventions, as well as seeking the UN working groups and special rapporteurs. And finally, what are we expecting is we hoping to leverage on network partners for greater impact, have sharing sessions like this where we can have strategies and best practices shared, and provide support for network partners campaigns. We also hope that we can engage with donors for optimum allocation of financial resources. And I don't want to take much time, and I guess we can discuss further in the next session. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Bina, for sharing the powerful work that you all are doing in Malaysia on citizenship rights. And finally, I would like to introduce Suyai Lutz, who is with the Network of Grassroots Gender Advocates in Argentina, to share a little bit about how you use legal empowerment approaches to advance gender equity in your context. Suyai, please go ahead.
Bien, hola a todos, ¿se me escucha bien? Genial. Bien, bueno, mi nombre es Suyai Lutz, soy parte de la red de promotoras territoriales de género de Argentina, y nos habían invitado a conversar sobre la importancia del empoderamiento jurídico para conquistar la justicia de género. En primer lugar, mencionar que esa es la estrategia fundamental con la que trabajamos desde la red de promotoras de género. Justamente nuestro trabajo se basa en intentar potenciar las capacidades de la comunidad, generar y construir herramientas desde la comunidad, y poder formar a un grupo de compañeras de los distintos territorios, de los sectores más vulnerables, para que puedan ser referentes en las temáticas de género en sus territorios. Y esto creemos que es muy importante porque cuando hablamos de justicia de género, y más allá de la potencia y de lo positivo que pueda ser las legislaciones, por lo menos en nuestro país, en Argentina, nos encontramos con la problemática de que las mujeres no pueden acceder a la justicia y cuando acceden desisten del proceso por lo que implica la revictimización y por lo que implica las dificultades de sostener un proceso ante la justicia. Entonces lo que necesitamos es potenciar las capacidades de mujeres y referentes para que puedan hacer un proceso de acompañamiento en ese acceso a la justicia. A su vez decimos que es la estrategia fundamental, la del empoderamiento jurídico, porque por lo menos en nuestra experiencia, desde el movimiento feminista en Argentina, nos hemos dado otras estrategias, como puede ser la incidencia legislativa, conquistando leyes muy importantes, como puede ser las manifestaciones callejeras, en donde el movimiento feminista realmente es muy masivo en nuestro país. Sin embargo, nos enfrentamos que al día de hoy tenemos la horrorosa cifra de una mujer víctima de femicidio cada 26 horas. Entonces, en función de esta situación, es que decimos, es muy positivo, nuevamente, que puedan existir determinadas leyes, es muy positivo el grado de masividad del movimiento feminista y la lucha en las calles, la visibilización, las conquistas que hemos tenido, pero si determinadas políticas públicas no llegan a los sectores más vulnerables, a las mujeres de los sectores más empobrecidos, y si no hay un control sobre esas políticas públicas por parte de la sociedad civil, la realidad es que vamos a seguir estando lejos de la justicia de género y que estas cifras no van a reducirse. Entonces nos parece fundamental este trabajo de empoderamiento jurídico de los territorios y sobre todo generar una perspectiva de trabajo en red. No es solo el trabajo que pueda realizar nuestra organización, nuestras promotoras de género, nuestras referentes, sino que nos dimos cuenta que la potencia está en generar esas redes comunitarias en cada lugar para poder afrontar determinadas situaciones. En base a eso, y para no hacerla muy extensa, me parece que en el marco de esta red podríamos trabajar en algunos ejes que sería interesante en función del intercambio de experiencias que recién se dio. Me parece que hay algo muy potente de la red de los distintos lugares, de partes de todo el mundo, en donde podemos hacer un intercambio de experiencias, de dinámicas más concretas, que nos sirva la experiencia de las otras organizaciones que están en la red, para poder llevarla adelante en nuestros territorios. Me parece que podemos pensar en estrategias más generales para el reconocimiento jurídico y económico de lo que yo llamo promotoras territoriales de género, pero que seguramente tenga el nombre de defensoras, referentes, barriales, etcétera, el nombre que sea, digamos, en cada país, pero me parece que tenemos que avanzar en un reconocimiento jurídico y económico. Me parece que hay una discusión muy interesante, abierta acá en Argentina, pero creo que en el resto del mundo también, y si no, bienvenida sea, que tiene que ver con la necesidad de una reforma judicial feminista, si hablamos de acceso a la justicia por parte de las mujeres y de justicia de género. Creo que de esta red pueden salir muchas herramientas sobre eso. Y tomando en cuenta lo que decían Beverly y otras compañeras, me parece que es importante también poder tener un intercambio sobre protocolos de seguridad para las promotoras de género, para las promotoras comunitarias, para las defensoras, ya que es en muchos países y en distintos niveles, es una práctica riesgosa para ellas mismas enfrentarse al poder, enfrentarse a la violencia, acompañar a otras mujeres en estas situaciones. Y por último, me parece que podemos pensar estrategias de conjunto sobre cómo podemos incidir en las políticas públicas, algo de lo que decía Manuel: puede existir la ley, puede existir, digamos, herramientas jurídicas, pero si no hay política pública, si no hay recursos, si no hay un compromiso estatal, va a ser muy difícil que eso se aplique. Entonces, ¿cómo incidimos en las políticas públicas y cómo desde las organizaciones civiles y de género ejercemos un control sobre esas políticas? Bueno, muchas gracias y abierta al intercambio para continuar.
Great, thank you so much, Suyai, for sharing the ways in which you're using legal empowerment at the grassroots level to advance gender equity. So please do feel free to share any questions that you might have for any of the presenters in the chat. And I also wanted to give a moment to my colleague, Rebecca Iwerks. Rebecca, are you on?
Hi, I know that it is late and quick, but I just wanted to let people know really quickly that the Legal Empowerment Network is also convening a group of people who are working on land and environmental justice specifically. And as part of that, we're trying to build a global campaign that focuses on ensuring that communities have the right to the power to control what happens on their land that they own or use. And we're in the early days of creating this campaign, but we want to make sure that women's voices and perspectives are rooted in that as we're creating it. So I'll put my email in the chat and would love to continue conversations as a kind of another live space that is not gender specific, but also has connections to this work.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So again, please feel free to share any questions you might have in the chat. But I think one question that comes to mind is many of you have touched upon the issue of protection, the threats that grassroots justice defenders, women justice defenders on the ground are facing when they're, whether they're confronting extractive industries or whether they're pushing for land rights or engaging in other action towards justice at the community level. So I was wondering if any of the speakers might like to touch upon this, what are ways in which a global network such as this, as we're bringing together our members across the world, how can we support and respond to this crisis of protection for grassroots justice defenders? If any of you might have thoughts on, what are some solutions that we as a network can support? And please feel free to jump in, or I may call on some of you randomly.
Yeah, can I say something? Yeah, I think I can give the example how we are working with communities on the ground. I think we have what we call a committee of local communities on the ground. So for us, we think that
I'm sorry, we're here.
Is to defend human rights or right of women is to have this to organize these grassroots organization on the ground and to give them support in terms of capacity building, in terms of how to organize themselves on the ground, but also to obtain legal documents, because sometimes when you work as human rights defenders, even you are defending rights of women, sometimes they will ask you, do you have a legal existence? So we as Afroch, for instance, what we do is that. And yeah, so it's a challenging work, because sometimes it's because sometimes you are because there is sometimes a problem of language, because most of the time the language they spoke in which they speak is not an official language. So how to communicate, how to, even when you need to give them to organize a training, you need to take this challenge into account, how to communicate when you are working with communities, and also to make sure that you are taking into account the right of women. And because even when you have a program, so you need to make sure that you have a program. In this program, you have a specific rights or program for women. Yeah. So now we have, I think we have more than 10 local communities where we are working, where we have this kind of grassroots organization, and it works. It work, but there is a lot of challenges, and we need maybe some support in terms of sharing experience, in terms of sharing idea how the others they are doing, and yeah. So we, and also to have what a database of information, how to do that, and yeah, to monitor and to share this information of leaders, politicians, to get change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And Arti, I know you also spoke quite a bit about the threats online and offline that women justice defenders are facing. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this, on what we as a network could do to respond.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of the important issues regarding language is something we really need to think about in terms of access tools. For example, in the context of South Africa, in terms of restrictions, defenders are not only facing, harassment, but they're facing criminal charges. And often a lot of the defenders doing this work aren't empowered to know, as Beverly said, it's extrajudicial measures. So working within the current legislative system and laws, and using the existing laws to silence defenders. In addition, it not only requires legal resources, it often leads to a burnout and just overburdening defenders with a lot of legal cases and time to hamper them from actually doing the work that they are trying to do. And I really do think that a database is something that could be a useful resource. Obviously, I think in terms of language and logistics, there are different contexts to take into consideration. So for example, if you're thinking about women land defenders in Fuleni in South Africa, for example, working against extractive industries, physical sort of resources, such as, legal documents or pamphlets might be more useful because of the digital divide and lack of access to digital resources. In other parts, digital access or resources online may be more helpful, but I think having a centralized kind of system where, we can get access to this kind of content is important, because we often find in the work that we do in working with women human rights defenders that there are so many resources out there, but people don't know, what are the toolkits, what are the mechanisms that are out there to protect them, and they often rely on international organizations. But as I mentioned, we need to connect the dots with grassroots movements. So, we typically only work with certain groups, and, other groups that may not have access and the same visibility get left out of the discussion and out of the legal empowerment. So it's not a clear answer, but I think it's really important elements that we need to think about in doing this work. And in relation to online harassment, again, I think in terms of a lot of people don't know what their rights are online in terms of, what sort of reporting mechanisms. And I think some of this of work needs to also be done by the big social media networks. But I think as civil society organizations, we can share, again, resources for women human rights defenders. How do you report things to Facebook? How do we follow up? How do we build contacts to provide that support for follow-up, which is going to also be an added burden for activists who are trying to defend fundamental rights.
Thank you, Arti. Yes, I see, Abby, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
If anyone has any questions or comments, please do share. but as we close, I just had one burning question for me. A number of you had spoken, Beverly, Suyai, Vina, about empowering women to take part in decisions that affect their own lives, to take leadership positions, to be a part of these decision-making apparatuses. And I was just curious if any of you could share some successful key tip or advice. I think every organization that I spoke to wants this and is finding in some way, trying to find a way to achieve this. And I was just wondering if you had any kind of insights from your work in the grassroots, kind of in the field, that you can draw to help others find ways to build power among women, build leadership power and a stronger voice in decision making.
Maybe I can start. Well, I think in our case in the Philippines, in the Cordillera, we have always been accused of indigenous women being too powerful, and we would have many cases of women in leadership positions. But I mean, that's often being said. But I think one of the important when we assess it, it's when we speak of women's rights or women's empowerment, it's not only women alone, especially in indigenous communities. So when we give like, what are women's rights? It's not supposed to be a seminar only for women, but it should include the men and especially the elders, no? Because this would be unifying. At the end of the day, I mean, they will later become husbands, they will later become, mothers, fathers. So the aspect of limiting women's rights education to women should also be sort of what you call this. It should not be the case. And I think two, when we also speak of human rights, we have always believed that each and every one of us should be a human rights worker. I mean, human rights work or paralegal work, especially in a community context, is not an expert line of work. I mean, every member should be able to have at least a grasp of the basics of what do you mean by due process of law, what do you mean of documentation. So because many of us are not literate, now many of us are not educated to write, but at least we are trained orally. So if you have the basic concepts of what do you need to document, the who, what, why, etc., I mean, they're able to relate this. And now when it comes to criminal procedures, video is also an accepted form of documentation. So at least they're able to do this freely, and they're able to do this in their own language. So I think those are, I think, what we believe were lessons in the people's movement, the indigenous people's movements here in the Philippines would be those three. And then, of course, the third one would be in terms of solidarity and then the learning experience. It's really, really very, how do you say this, inspiring for indigenous women in the community if they are able to hear also of successful stories of other women in other communities or in other countries. Maybe for us who are more or less exposed to other communities or with other movements, it's something that we probably take for granted. But if a simple video message in a community activity, it's something that they hold on dearly and say that we are not alone. So in that case, that's how solidarity works. It might be small for others, but then in our case, the fourth lesson would be we should also be able to celebrate and be thankful of our victories, no matter how small they are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Beverly. And we are unfortunately out of time, but Bina, I saw that you had your hand up if you had 30 seconds, if there's anything you'd like to share before we close out.
So what worked very well in the Malaysian context, we have the impacted community on WhatsApp groups, and it's easier for us to mobilize them. And they also support each other and help with the documentation and all the difficult issues. It also gives a lot of emotional support to the women. So this has worked really well for us, and we're thankful for this because they also help to mobilize each other. We have people on TikTok and Instagram, and they are just mothers who want to take action and be self-advocates. So I think for us that worked well. Thanks.
Thank you, Bina. And so I see that Suya, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Bien, quería comentar sobre la pregunta que había hecho Abigail. Para mí, o sea, en relación a nuestra experiencia con el empoderamiento jurídico como estrategia, hay como dos cuestiones que, como recién señalaban, son triunfos pequeños, pero que hay que celebrarlos porque me parece que hacen empezar a andar la rueda y pueden ir construyendo triunfos más grandes y trabajo en red sobre todo. Uno tiene que ver que cuando hablamos de empoderamiento jurídico, hablamos de un aspecto de un empoderamiento de las mujeres y de las poblaciones más vulnerables en general. Entonces, por ejemplo, en nuestro caso, el haber abierto una puerta sobre cuáles son los derechos vinculados a las problemáticas, a las violencias de género, también abrió las puertas para que esas mujeres, esas compañeras que ahora son defensoras, que son promotoras, puedan repensar su propia vida con respecto a otros derechos. O sea, nos ha pasado que, por ejemplo, referentes de algunos barrios comenzaran a decir, bueno, yo, por ejemplo, tengo derecho a estudiar, y empezar a estudiar, empezar a hacer una carrera, lo cual quizás sin antes empezar a hacer un proceso de empoderamiento jurídico, aunque sea vinculado a los derechos referente a género, no lo hubiera hecho. Se trata de un empoderamiento más general. Y después me parece que también se da esa misma situación cuando nosotras también trabajamos con poblaciones que en general son migrantes de países limítrofes de Argentina, y en general muchas veces sienten una situación de discriminación, que a partir de empezar a hablar sobre la cuestión de género, se puede empezar a abordar ese tema, y hoy estamos pensando en, bueno, cómo vinculamos el empoderamiento jurídico basado en la que para nosotras tiene que ser una tarea principal, que es ser promotora de género, pero bueno, que hay una interseccionalidad, o sea, no es lo mismo pensar cómo se ejerce la violencia para personas migrantes. Entonces, están empezando a abordar esa cuestión. Y el otro triunfo me parece que tiene que ver, que también nos está pasando en una comunidad, en uno de los barrios en los que trabajamos, cuando ese trabajo de promotora llega al punto de decir, yo lo quiero replicar. Entonces, quizás ya no depende de las primeras personas que impulsaron este trabajo, esta formación de promotoras o defensoras de género, sino que ya esas personas que tuvieron un proceso de empoderamiento jurídico y se formaron, dicen, yo lo voy a ir a dar a este comedor, a esta asociación, yo voy a ser la capacitadora de estas nuevas generaciones de promotoras o defensoras de género. Entonces, me parece que en esos dos aspectos, uno, el empoderamiento jurídico es un aspecto de un empoderamiento mucho más general, que abre puertas a trabajar otros temas, y a trabajar sobre todo los derechos, y dos, el efecto multiplicador es un triunfo y una consecuencia directa de ese empoderamiento jurídico.
Thank you. That's so moving. Unfortunately, we have to close, but those 3 points that Beverly, Bina, and Suyai raised, integration with other people's movements, self-help, and personal agency, and the multiplier effect of legal empowerment. Those are great lessons to be bringing with us. And thank you as well for all of RP and Emmanuel for your contributions on how we can work together to help women be safer in doing this work. To close, I want to thank everyone for your time in joining this conversation. As a next step, our goal is to take the results of the survey and today's conversation and continue our efforts to support all your work towards legal empowerment and gender justice. We'll be sparking some opportunities for continued engagement in the future, whether it's learning, networking, or opportunities to advocate together. This is just the beginning, and we really look forward to doing more work. One question I might ask for you before you leave, if you could just add in the chat one thing that you would like to learn from other people in the network or in this webinar. If there's one thing you're keen to learn about together, what is that thing? What area or issue are you curious to learn more about? And that will help us kind of define our next steps as we move forward. We'll be in touch with you all. Thank you again for your time and support.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. I see some great contributions in the chat, linking legal empowerment to strengthening democracy, in the context of civic space, for youth, for the empowerment of grassroots communities. So thank you. We'll be taking these key messages forward and be in touch with you. Please feel free to email us with any further questions. I know we didn't get to everything today, but feel free to email us and connect offline, and we look forward to being in touch. So we'll close out now, and thank you again.
Thank you. Good night.